Today's episode is brought to you by the latest biohacking tool, which has made me much more productive and focused. It's called Magic Mind, and I'll tell you more about it later in this episode. So for now, let's get started.
Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business, write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Caesar Abaid.
Learn from the experts, think outside the box, have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again. I'm Caesar Abaid, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So, join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance starting right now. Today, my friends, I will talk with Kevin Torf. He's author of a book called Getting the Job Done, which I just read, and we'll talk about practical advice to manage successful projects. So let me introduce you to Kevin. Kevin Torf is an information systems executive with a career spanning more than 40 years. He specializes in large-scale IT strategic plans, project design, procurement, and implementation. He is the co-founder and managing partner of T2 Group and the developer of the company's hybrid agile methodology. Over his career, Kevin has orchestrated the design and implementation of numerous complex IT infrastructure deployments across the globe, including some of the world's largest communication network systems. And he's a strong advocate of professional development, which I also am. So, Kevin, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
Awesome. So yeah, like I said, the book is called Getting the Job Done. I really enjoyed it. I marked it up well so I could ask you some good questions because it's a different approach. It's more that there's like real world anecdotes of projects you managed and projects that you used as examples. So it's very interesting to read. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, like, what are some of the key factors to consider when you're putting a team together for a project?
Hopefully you can get to choose your team. If you can't get to choose your team, then you got to work with the people that you currently have. But I think if you do get the opportunity to build a team, I know everybody focuses on skills and talent. I focus on a person's character and their commitment and how they're going to work with each other as a higher priority over a subject matter expert that might be more skilled versus another person. To me, a team is about working together as a single entity, and having people that are bought into that philosophy can give you much better, more effective results. You can always go and look up something and research something if you don't know, exactly what it is you want to do. But it's hard to build character or teach people how to have character. So that's probably my biggest takeaway, or something that I've maybe, done over time, where I've got fascinated and fixated by people with talent, but it's always backfired on me ultimately. And today I've changed my thoughts and how I go about it.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, I'm one of those folks who I have a team, and I often work with the same team. Do you find that sometimes when a project is presented to you, you know your team, you know what they can do, you feel like you have already a sense of the likelihood of success here just by the type of project and timelines and things like that?
I do. It's more confidence, I think, that I want from the team. There's many projects we work on and I work on where we have never experienced what we're going to be doing. So to me, it's more than just being, this is a team that's experienced at doing that specific work versus what is a team capable of. And a team that can structure themselves, communicate well, can brainstorm together, can accomplish things that they might not necessarily be very experienced in. It doesn't totally compensate for the fact if you have someone that's done it before and you know how long they would take. If it's software development and you know that one person works at a certain rate and pace and, they have a capability to build databases. Yeah, that will give you a lot more insight in estimating how long a project should take. But it shouldn't be you as the project manager telling people how long a project should take. It should be the team telling you how long it should take them.
That's right. Yeah, especially those doing the actual work. They're the best ones to estimate. And speaking of it, of estimating, I had a question for you about that as well. I find that this is... maybe this is just the my little corner of the world in which I live in, but it seems to me that estimates, right, is a bit of an art. It's an art that's kind of losing champions, if that makes sense. Especially with Agile, and there's a movement, the no estimates movement out there, and these folks usually fight about this on Twitter, but it's still important. We still need to be able to estimate. So how can project managers, those who are listening right now, for example, how can they get better at budgeting time, for example, and resources to meet these deadlines and be able to predict with more accuracy the resources and budget that they're going to need?
So before I answer that question, I just want to get back to something you said earlier about, should you even be estimating something when maybe it might be even wrong to begin with, or what's the value of it? I'm definitely the firm believer on the side everything should be estimated. We live in a life where everything is about money and the cost of doing something. And cost of doing something is the number of resources and the amount of time it takes. That is an investment. And, from a perspective of understanding the value proposition, you have to know what that investment is. Now, you might be wrong and you might not get that number correct. But you do need to have it. I also believe everything needs to be measured. And if you don't have a goal and objective, you've got no metrics to measure it against. It's like playing a sports team or watching a basketball game where they're not keeping score. That doesn't lead to success. So with that said, answering your question around, how do I estimate better when more than likely I'm going to be wrong? You've got to reduce the size and the quantity of what you're estimating. The further out you're going to project, the more likely you are going to be wrong. And I use those words, the more likely you're going to be wrong, because it's likely you're going to be wrong anyway. But you're going to be even more wrong if you're trying to estimate something that's going to take several months or several years. Whereas if you can try and simplify what you're thinking into something smaller and quantitative, into maybe a few days or even a few hours, it's probable that you're going to be more correct. And then if you can just do that multiple times and build up to your full-scale project, you're going to get a rough idea of what that timeline would take, and it's going to be more accurate. So my advice is break your projects down into smaller components and into smaller iterations, and you will start learning how to estimate better.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, this is also again, it's one of it's an art that's slowly being forgotten. But I remember studying for the PMP exam back in 2009. Over 10 years ago. You break it down into smaller chunks until you get work packages, and then you estimate those. Right? I think people have forgotten.
No, and sometimes it's you've got to train your mind how to think simpler. I think people overcomplicate matters, and it's just I think, from my experience working with people, that they do overcomplicate it, and they do this to themselves, and because they don't think through this in a very simplistic way. It's like saying how long is it going to take me to build this building? And you try and estimate it, but you're thinking about the whole building and the whole complexity, or I'm going to build a data center because I'm in IT a lot. You think of everything where you got to say, all I got to do is just find the premises this week. And then you say, oh, well, before I find the premises, I must define what I want. Okay, so I've got to define what I want. I want a premise this size. I'll need, in a data center, you require power. I need cooling. You just keep it there, and you're not thinking about building the data center. You're just thinking about little components of it. Oh, okay, now I've determined the size of the data center I need. Now I need to go look for that. Well, once I found it, now I need to understand what it's going to take for me to put in the equipment that I need to. But it's just really bringing it down to the simplest thought you can, and then putting a quantitative size to that, and then just adding to that as the project expands.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I want to talk about metrics a little bit. So I'm in an organization, we work with OKRs, objectives and key results, and every quarter. And I find that those key results, they tend to be projects that last 3 months. We often spend some time thinking about the metrics and how to show progress here, how to show that we're done. Yeah, mostly, at the end, it's very nice to be able to check something off as done. And we can't do that unless we can measure it against something. So you talked in the book about using specific language. Why is language such an important and essential part of establishing these metrics?
Because the definition of done can be so subjective. When a person says, I'm going to, build this data center that we spoke of, and, you keep it to just a very broad and a very general term. When you get to the end of that project, were you really done? Did you have all the equipment in there? Were all the services that you expected to be available? Are they available? Can you maintain that facility? Has it been documented? And sometimes when people consider done, they're not thinking of all of those elements. So basically, the expectation of done to somebody else is when, a week later someone comes back and said, oh, well, I never really thought through I never gave you the documentation, or I never gave you the operating procedures for this room. Well, then the question is, were you really done or not? So you set the wrong expectation with the person that you're delivering the project to. So when you say, oh, well, I got everything I was supposed to do and done in 3 months, but I really didn't give you everything. I gave you the car, but I never gave you the steering wheel, or I never put air in the tires. You need to express the definition of that done is in a little bit more of a articulate way. So you need to say, I'll be done with the data center where I can hand this over to a team that can utilize this in a capacity where they can operate it with all the instructions that they need, plus all the equipment and services they require. Now, I just ad-libbed that and made that up. But now what I've done is I've better defined the definition of done. Now, when I start setting metrics up against that on how long some of those things are going to take me to get done, I can now say, well, you did actually what you had expected. So now the metrics become more valuable because you have actually completed what you ultimately set out to achieve.
Okay, so I have a few more questions to ask Kevin right now, but first, I'd like to take a moment here to talk about Magic Mind. Like I said, the latest biohacking tool, which is helping me with focus, concentration, and productivity. It's really an amazing thing, and it's kind of hard to explain. So it is a drink. It's about 2 ounces in a bottle, and it has all these ingredients that were carefully put together by a guy named James Bashara. He's a startup founder and is an author and an investor. He co-wrote a fascinating book I'm reading right now called Beyond Coffee, a sustainable guide to nootropics, adaptogens, and mushrooms. So basically, he's on a quest to improve brain performance. And so he took all that he's learned about this topic and put it into this product and called it Magic Mind. So I've been taking it after my morning coffee, and it tastes kind of weird. It's green. It tastes like It's hard to describe. There's some matcha and some other herbs in there, so it's got that like a grassy taste. But after you take it, you just settle into this zone, hard to describe. And all of a sudden, you're just working, and you get in the zone, you're working, and that desire to procrastinate kind of fades away. So I love the fact that it's 100% natural. It's paleo-friendly, gluten-free, keto-friendly, and it's nut-free. So like I said, it tastes kind of weird, but I wonder, if besides all these benefits, if it tasted good on top of it all, then I'd be very suspicious. So I'll take the weird taste for the benefit. So Magic Mind has partnered with me and the PM for the Masses community. So they're offering a limited 20% discount to my audience. So you can go to the website, which is magicmind.co/masses. Magicmind.co, not .com, .co/masses. So magicmind.co/masses. Magicmind.co/masses. And if you use the code MASSES20, MASSES20 at checkout, you get 20% off of your order. Again, magicmind.co/masses and use the code MASSES20 at checkout. Now let's go back to Kevin Torf and projects. That makes so much sense. Do you think that sometimes people do not, I think this is, it's almost like common sense, but do you think that sometimes that is not done because we enjoy living in but we're trying to avoid making a firm commitment?
I don't know if it's intentional. I think it's just poor habits as well. I think there might be some element to what you've said. Just people, not, wanting to make that commitment. But I also think it's just not thinking through what you want to do. If you say I'm going to get something completed in a week, that means you never have to go back to it ever again. But if the goal was I'm just going to do an assessment or I'm just going to review something, and I'm not really completed because my assessment was then going to give me the information I needed to then have a plan. And then I was going to complete the plan. And then I was going to, once the plan's completed, I was going to do a delivery and hand it over to the stakeholder or the customer. Those words, assessment, delivery, plan, is what's really defining what I need to fulfill in the next task that I'm going to be performing. And I just think this comes down to what we spoke about earlier. People just breaking things down into smaller tasks and then using the right words to describe that task. And I think you've got to train your mind how to think like that, more so than even people intentionally not committing. Mm-hmm.
Just like we keep coming back to the breaking things down into smaller parts. What do you have a favorite method or tool that you use to break these things down?
I've used all the different agile tools on the market, from Jira and Pivotal and others. Even the Microsoft project now has agile tools inside it that you can use. But then, even just doing a spreadsheet and, just putting out each one of the tasks and then, putting how long each task is going to take, that can be just as effective. I think the secret here is not even the tool you use. It's breaking the tasks up into things that are going to be pretty much a couple of hours. Agile is very strong in saying, don't worry about necessarily the future as much. Worry about more what you're doing immediately. So it's sitting down and saying, all right, what can I accomplish over the next week? And, thinking that in the next week, I only got 40 hours. Over the next 2 weeks, I got 80 hours. And then breaking each task up into maybe no more than 4 hours and listing out those tasks So you can actually then, when you complete it at each task, you can say, I'm done. So Jira is a good tool, but Jira is very much a tool for more software developers. So if you're running an infrastructure project where there's dependencies and things like that, it's not ideal. As I said, Microsoft Project Portfolio gives you other capabilities, but that's a very complex product because it allows you to manage resources and do budgeting costs. So it really comes down to what you're looking for. But, one thing, Excel is probably the most versatile tool on the market, and you can do a lot with it. And, I started my career using that before I started even some more of the advanced tools.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about diversity. So I work for an organization that is literally worldwide. We're fully distributed. We have people from all time zones and over 100 countries. And one thing that's really interesting is to have a team that is composed by all these individuals. They have not only they have a diverse background and culture, but also in experience. And I find that it usually makes the working together a richer experience. Now, how can project managers listening right now, how can they empower their teams, let's say, and benefit from this diversity of experience and backgrounds?
Well, it's to really allow the team to collaborate and put no one person in the team above the other and let them understand the definition of the word team. If you're going to create diversity, the most famous person that, ever devised an education system was Montessori. From Italy, she said that, classrooms should comprise of children of multiple ages. Typically, our education today, when you go to school, you have, one class with one age group. Montessori put, I don't know what the actual ages were, but, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and 7-year-old together, and then put, an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and 10-year-old together. And the reason she did this was that she felt that the younger kids would learn from the older kids. The older kids would learn by teaching the younger kids, because you actually learn more by teaching someone than even learning from that person. And the kids that were in the middle group would get the benefit of both. That's diversity in itself. And I look at it in a project, you have people that are very experienced, that may be subject matter experts, some people that might not be as experienced. So, how do you get them to help each other be successful? And how do you get one to learn from the other? You got to do that by not making any one person in the team more important than the other. I think we have a habit of doing that. And I think that sometimes people that are very strong, they might dictate what's going on in the team. And that's actually not very healthy. You really want to be able to be more collaborative. So my suggestion or recommendation or takeaway for people is, help people that are maybe not as good as you, learn what they need to in an appropriate manner, and, work all together to help each other be better.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's I had heard of Montessori. I have kids, but we homeschool, and I often talk about that because we have other family friends who also homeschool, and kids are of all different ages. And I find that these kids, they tend to have a more, it sounds counterintuitive, but they seem to be a better socialized, if that makes sense. They can talk to kids that are older, they can talk to kids that are younger, they can talk to adults, they can talk to the elderly in a way that is much more natural than the experience I had growing up, in a classroom of 30 kids of the same age. We lived in the same neighborhood, same social class, and for a few years we were all boys. So by having a team or a classroom that is so homogeneous that way, you kind of you tend to narrow your outlook in life, and as a result in your project as well.
No, I agree. I think it's actually, I know it might be counterintuitive, but sometimes when you put, as you mentioned, 30 kids in one classroom, all of the same age group, you actually start competing with each other more than you start working with each other, because you always, everyone wants to differentiate themselves. And that's definitely, the opposite of the word team.
I'm nodding here because that was my experience growing up. It wasn't until I realized, hey, I can actually I can be the top student in this class, because they started sharing the average scores from everything. And that was what motivated me to go and study. It's not that I had passion for learning. It wasn't any of that. It was just I wanted to beat everybody else, And at the time, it's kind of fun. And you kind of, in a roundabout way, I learned it. But that's not what you want, right? You want to teach collaboration and teamwork more so than individual achievement over everybody else.
No, very much so. I like competition, and the term now I think that everybody uses is gamification.
Right.
But I don't like to pit people against each other. You actually bring out the worst in people, not necessarily the best. There's always going to be a winner, and that person will prevail. But then there's always going to be a loser, and that loser might not necessarily prevail in the way you want. But if you can, let's say, had a team of 10 people, and you break that team up into two smaller teams of 5 people, and now you had those two teams compete with each other. Now what you do is you get the team to work together with each other to actually beat the other team. It's not about the individual person. Now what happens is if you got a weak person on one of the teams, the rest of the other team members need to help that person. And this is how that team will improve. So there is merit in competition and there's merit in competing, but not less about individuals and more about letting the teams compete with other teams. I found much more, it's given me much better results.
Very nice distinction. Yes, I love that. Okay, so let's say there is some individual competition and the morale is kind of low and there's negativity. How can project managers in a situation like that, how can we create a positive culture within not only within the team, but the organization at large?
It's just being repetitive. It's keeping reminding the team that it's a team. Don't, take out some of your the verbiage you use where you refer to an individual and you talk about what a single person's accomplishments or contribution. When the team gives you a status report, get them to say, we, the team, use that vocabulary. It's a slow process. There's no one silver bullet, but just keeping to practice this mannerism where you all are in it together and you're going to succeed and fail together will allow people to start realizing their obligation to each other. There's something very unique about an individual. A person would rather not necessarily would be more than willing to fail if somebody told them, a manager or a superior told them what to do, and then they didn't do it, versus a person failing to their colleague who's meant to be of equal value to them in a team. They will be more obligated to each other. And if you can drive that level of camaraderie where the team knows they have to rely on each other, you break down those single individuals that can really be very disruptive to that process. And, sometimes at the end of the day, you just need to remove those people from the team. It's definitely the last resort. But as we started this whole conversation in the very beginning, I'd rather choose a person that's more collaborative than someone that might be super talented.
Right. Yes, I agree. I remember when I was in the military and I was in boot camp and the instructor was giving somebody a hard time about being I forget what it was, missing a button or something silly like that. And I remember him saying that, like, when I'm on a battleship, I don't care how much you know about the radar systems or whatever. If you're showing up late and you didn't do your homework and you're just not showing up, I don't care, right? I'd rather have somebody who's just starting but are showing up and doing their best and working together as a team. And that kind of stuck with me, that because knowledge, you can always acquire more, right? But within an organization, you can set people up for success when it comes to knowledge by giving them training, for example. But how do you train work ethic? How do you train somebody to be honest and collaborative? That's a lot harder. So I get what you're saying. It's a lot. It's better if you're going to choose between these two type of profiles. It's better to have the person who has the right attitude, but perhaps not all the knowledge, versus the opposite.
And it's unfortunate, but I don't know even. It's very hard to teach someone character and how to work with other people if they don't know how. And I actually have come to the conclusion it's probably not even worth the investment. Now that's very sad and it's very unfortunate to say that. But life's very short and you don't have a long time to get stuff done, and you've got commitments. So trying to educate someone in the right way to conduct themselves. Again, and I know it's a very unfair approach, but I just don't have time for that, unfortunately, anymore. Right. And I'd rather focus on the ones that do. And like you said, I'll teach them the skills they need. But yeah, no, it's definitely something. Unfortunately, everyone grows up differently. Everyone's educated differently. Everyone's parents teach them differently, and sometimes that you can't predict what's going to happen later on in life, and it's just unfortunate sometimes that you have to deal with these circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting thing, like I'm from Brazil originally, and the word we use for education in upbringing is the same, So we often make that distinction that we don't have two words for it. But in English, you would say your upbringing, right? That's when you learn how to be a human, a good human. Versus
it's a good word.
Yeah. Versus,
I call my father taught me character. My father said your character should supersede everything else that you do in life. And if you have good character, there's many things you will accomplish.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. So we get all these different diverse people. They're trying to do their best. They're collaborating. One danger and one pitfall of, and I've been in organizations on the two ends of this spectrum. On one end is there is kind of a dictator figure that tells you what to do and how to do it and when. And then at the other end of the spectrum is total freedom. And what happens there is that there's usually collaboration and discussions forever, and things don't get done. So you talk in the book about the value of collaboration and consensus. So how do you know when it's time to end the debate, let's say, and settle on a compromise, and you take the leadership in that situation?
Wow, that's the magic sauce. That's the secret, and there's no secret. It's really hard. There is no right answer to that question. I think everybody does it differently, but you do need a balance. And this is where I've studied many methodologies. You spoke about PMP, going through the whole project management, where you do things in a very much more articulate, managed way. I've studied Agile Scrum, where you are far more collaborative and you try to find that consensus all the time. And I don't necessarily believe one method's necessarily that much more right than the other. I think it's a hybrid. I think you try and be collaborative. You try and come to a consensus. consensus where you can. But at times, you still need to get the job done. And if you're unable to reach that consensus, you need to sometimes, really coordinate and just set where you need to be and make sure some of the people are delivering against that. Now, I think how you go about it is very important. If you still need to respect the people you work with. And even though you might now be dictating a little bit more than, asking and questioning, you need to do it in a way that it's not going to be taken incorrectly. But you do need to step in. When does that happen? You can let one or two things slide from time to time. You can always recover if you just take charge from the very beginning. Every time something went wrong, you're probably going to be moving into that mindset all the time. But if it starts happening again and again, and it's the same thing that's causing some of those problems, you do need to take charge. The only thing I just like to tell people is it doesn't excuse you being respectful. You still got to be respectful. Being disrespectful, regardless of whether you're asking someone or telling someone, is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. The other one approach that I take sometimes is when I am conveying the decision that I made. When I'm backing it up, I try to bring in the people who made suggestions along the way as to why, like let's say I'm choosing B instead of A. We're choosing B because this, then the other, as we discussed over here. And thank you so and so for the contribution to that discussion. And I try to do that. So I bring everybody into that decision. So everybody feels like it's their decision, not just mine.
And that's a good example, trying to bring bring everybody together to know that everybody influenced the decision. So it wasn't who was right or who was wrong, or that it was, even if you came to the conclusion that B was the correct way to go about it, for the people that might have suggested A, it wasn't that they were necessarily wrong. They helped maybe define, because they were A, that B might be better. So they did play a role. So it's trying to do what you've said in a way where you say, everybody's contribution actually helped lead to the final conclusion. Right.
That's great. Kevin, this has been a pleasure. If people want to learn more about you and your book, where should they go?
I've got the typical LinkedIn profile. I think LinkedIn's now one of the, the biggest resources out there that I've been utilizing. I'm a little older than most, so I'm still not on that Facebook and Instagram like everyone else is. So LinkedIn, I have my name there. It's Kevin Torf. Mm-hmm. The company that I have founded is the T2 Group. That's T2 GROUP. .us, and you can click on their website. There's ways to connect to me from that website, or just go look me up on my LinkedIn profile. And I am pretty collaborative. I do like to work with people. I might not be as timely as I want to be, but anybody's welcome to ask me any questions, and if I will eventually get back to you. And I enjoy that. I enjoy people asking me questions. I learn sometimes more from questions people ask me than from the answers I give them.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to have links to Kevin's LinkedIn profile on the show notes for this episode, as well to t2group.us. And you can find that at pmforthemasses.com/138. Again, pmforthemasses.com/138 for episode 138. The book is called Getting the Job Done, Practical Advice and Real-World Anecdotes to Manage Successful Projects. I really recommend it. It's a pithy read, and it's full of anecdotes, and it's a great, bedtime reading like I did. So, Kevin, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you spending some time here with us today.
But now the thanks is all mine. Thanks for taking the time to interview me, ask me questions. Enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your listeners will enjoy it as much as we did.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com